Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well and happy Halloween. Before we jump into today's upload, a quick couple of links. As many of you may know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. These audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon. And folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because these things, they really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter. And they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this Halloween upload, shall we? There was an experience that I shared. I talked about another experience, tying that into that. Then that got me thinking about connections and theories I have to cryptid experiences. Ironically enough, I talk a lot about I use an area in the Appalachia as a kind of base for cryptid experiences and such like that. But the second part's going to be an experience out of an area called Calf Mountain, Virginia, which is on the Appalachian Trail. And the first part of this upload, I use Appalachia as kind of like an example of why I feel like certain things occur. And I'm no way downing Appalachia, any of the folks from the South, because I can tell you what, growing up in the Adirondacks, living in upstate New York all my life, moved to Florida for a couple of months, but missed the mountains. The folks that I've met from the South are some of the most humble, some of the most kind people I've ever met. And even in the extreme environment that they live in, they are still hospitable. So let's get into it. All right, so I had to rush that ending right there real quick because the old channel's mascot Tigger was scratching out the door. You just hear him. So today's first part of the upload is a kind of look at an experience that I kind of tied in a lot, which freaked me out a little bit. I've always said that there is a connection to experiences and addiction. As a person in recovery, I will have 10 years in April of 2026 from being a heroin addict for 22 years. And the majority of people that I've met and talked to have had addiction issues. People that have had experiences, whether it be alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex, whatever. There's some sort of addiction. And I know that certain doctors, certain health professions or health professionals would state that addictions are a kind of mental illness, a sickness, which I don't know how I feel about that, being in active recovery. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Still up in the air. But there was an experience last night that I had shared, and it was a person's father was in hospice. Prior to being in hospice, they were at their home. I imagine it would be almost like a palliative care, where the family was taking care of the person who was very ill. And the person who shared the experience, their father, was the one who was very ill with a form of dementia, right on the verge of death. And prior to being moved to the hospice clinic, they had been in a hospital bed in their home, and they kept seeing this child would peek around corners, and they would get really upset about this and almost afraid. And then the person's mom and sister were at the house with the passing father. And he had claimed to see two demons with them as well. Now, the person then thought, well, maybe it's dad's dementia. Maybe it's dad's dementia. And, if you weren't in a community like cryptozoology and paranormal research, you would pass it off as it's a mental illness. It's dementia. It's this, it's that. And then I said, well, that's real interesting, because they're blaming, or no, they weren't blaming the dementia. They were saying, I wonder if it's the dementia, or if indeed dad was seeing what he was seeing. And I said, I believe that the dad was seeing what he was seeing, because he is crying. He's in fear. My dad, when he was sick, 2 years ago now, coming up on 2 years in November, he was on palliative care himself, and suffering from a very dangerous infection, a viral infection, worse than MRSA. And it was causing this just severe dementia. And, he was adamant about seeing these workers working on part of this building. And I'm like, Dad, that's a hallway. And then I'm driving. I had to end up driving my dad because the hospital that he was at was just so terrible. They wouldn't even transport him because they didn't want to be liable. So my mom and I had to drive him to his physical rehabilitation, and he's near death at this point, and we're driving through a town an hour and a half south of our hometown in the Adirondacks. And he's like, oh my God, that's where that happened. Look what they're doing there. They redid all that. Wow, it looks amazing. And I'm like, Dad, I don't think you've ever been here before. Mom, has he? And she's like, I don't think so either. And they've been married for 50 something years. So dementia is powerful. That's what I'm trying to get at here. But I believe there is something much more powerful, and that is the paranormal. All right. So with that initial experience, I said, well, I've heard about these near-death experiences, and there was one that just popped into my mind, and it was a very traumatic experience. The guy was not a criminal, and not just, he wasn't a good dude. He wasn't a bad dude, but he wasn't a good dude, and something had happened to him. He's on the hospital. He's in the hospital. He's dying. They're trying to bring him back. I don't know. I don't remember the cause of him being on the hospital table and doctors trying to bring him back to life. But essentially, he is on this hospital bed dying or dead. However long, less than a minute. And that these doctors and nurses are just struggling to bring him back. And while they're doing that 30 seconds to 30 to 45 seconds, this man went through like months of torture in an area that he viewed as hell. There were these demons that were just grotesque, just these hideous creatures doing the most demonic things to him. Just massive amounts of pain and this and that. And I believe he was an atheist. I believe he was, or he may have believed in Christ as a young man, but just kind of, a lot of people do, they grow up believing, and then as age goes on, they kind of forget that part of their life. It happened to me. And he's just getting abused by these demons. They are, whatever. And he screams out, Jesus Christ, please help me. I will do anything. Please get me out of here. And the next thing, bam, he's opens his eyes, in the bright light of the operating table or the hospital table is right in his face, and he's like brought back. Maybe he thought he was in heaven at first, who wouldn't? You're getting tortured by these just grotesque creatures in hell or purgatory, whatever, wherever he was. So I was like, he saw all of this in 30 seconds time. And yet it was, he was tortured for months to a year of just some of the worst pain imaginable. And then boop, all in Christ's name, he was brought back. And so I was like, I believe that he saw demons. This guy that was, afraid of this creepy child that was peering around the lazy boy and, looking at him. And then the live stream went on, and it was an amazing live stream. I had so much fun. Wow. But live stream went on, and for some reason it stayed in my head. And I'm like, man, because I have always talked about something that I truly believe schizophrenics. Let's say we have 10 people who suffer from schizophrenia. And all 10 are just, however they are diagnosed or whatnot. And because I truly don't believe that you can 100%, mentally. It's not, your brain in a mental illness is so much harder to diagnose than something with our body, a heart condition or COPD, or you know what I mean? So 10 out of 10 have this, and I would say 2 out of those 10 don't suffer from schizophrenia, but actually suffer from some sort of paranormal demonic possession or some sort of whatever, right? And they are in a asylum or a mental hospital, whatever the PC word is for now, and fed medication. Just take your pill, but it's not working. Because why? Because they're not suffering from schizophrenia. They are actually demonically possessed. They are possessed by something that is just, having its way and laughing at this person's torture. So these connections are so freaking deep. And then I was like, well, if the mental illness part, drug addiction, and then I started to think about the Appalachia area and how I use it as like a base almost, because at one point in its history, what is it, like the 40s, 50s, coal mining was just booming. People were well off. Miners were well off. Their families were just, at one point, I think there was a city in West Virginia that was actually called Little New York City because of the mining boom, right? And then the government gets done with the area like they do, and they just, it's it's what they do. It's what they're known for. And you've got this population of people who now don't have any kind of income. The jobs are now scarce, and people become depressed. People become addicted to drugs and alcohol. Ironically enough, the hillbilly heroin epidemic just happened to happen right there. It just, from West Virginia down to Florida, it just happened to be there, right? Like there wasn't any kind of plan by the big pharma. And I believe that there was. But you have all of these strange events and experiences that occur in these areas. West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, hotbeds for paranormal, hotbeds for cryptid experiences, Dogman, Bigfoot, crawlers, UAP, UFO, whatever. And then you look back and you say, ironically enough, even before the mining boom, this area of the Appalachia was filled with talk of darkness, talk of the evil in the mountains, feral humans, feral people, haints, booger, just even before. So was this demonic area, the evil, did it just follow, or it's always been there? But it does. It follows and stays with the misery, the pain. I'm not afraid to say that I'm in recovery. And it strangely enough, growing up, I had and participated in a lot of strange things I never should have, with Ouija boards and reading about different practices and really, experimenting with evil. You use a Ouija board in it. That's a door, a window. It's it's like ripping the front of your house off and letting everyone in. Not just a door and a window. You just knock the whole freaking wall down. Because when you do play with one of those things, that's what happens. And there were 2 summers when I was growing up that's all we did down at our family's farm was play with that Ouija board. I don't even know where the Ouija board went after we got done playing with it. It just disappeared one day. Honestly, and I can't ask my cousin because it told us that we were all going to die. And 2 of my cousins that I played with constantly died. Both. One died of cancer and one was crushed. The one that was crushed was like a brother to me. Being an only child. He was my older cousin. He was my protector. He taught me how to ride 4-wheelers, ride 3-wheelers, just drive standard. He was my world growing up. My dad obviously is my dad, but he was like my older brother that I never had. And I was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Our friend who played with us is last I knew, and I've not talked to him in a long time, but he may be dead. I don't know, but he turned to addiction and alcoholism, drug addiction. He was a male prostitute. Both sexes, like just really, and there's nothing wrong with either, who you are, who you love. I don't care about that. But like, he just became something that he was not, mentally, physically, and spiritually, just sick, dead. And it said we were all going to see hellhounds. My cousin, both of them, yeah, actually, our friend and my cousin, who was like my brother, had terrifying nightmares about hellhounds chasing them. My other cousin Jay, I believe he had dreams too. I didn't. I had a Dogman experience. I saw a pack of dogmen. My friends saw these creatures running through the woods. These evil hellhound-like creatures standing bipedally at the end of the night. So there is a connection to all of this. Carl Jung had talked a lot about psychological realms and spiritual realms and connections to that and mystical narratives and stuff. And for someone like him, someone for his standing in the mental health community back in the day, he's like a founding father of mental health community and stuff like that. He recognized that connection, that paranormal spiritual connection to mental health. So yeah, these things are connected. And then someone had brought up that movie, I forget the name of it, but the Emily Rose movie, The Haunting of Emily Rose or whatever. But that poor old woman, they thought she had dementia. Nope, she was possessed by a demon. So if anyone says these connections aren't real, I would strongly disagree with that. Strongly. And that just looking at all this stuff that I looked at last night was insane. So that was part 1. Let's get into part 2 of today's upload, where a gentleman named Colin, who reached out to me, and his buddy Mike, or Michael, had hiked the Appalachian Trail from Pennsylvania to North Carolina So they did it backwards. But, growing up, I always thought the Appalachian Trail started in Mount Katahdin and went down to Georgia. I didn't realize that it went from Georgia to Katahdin. So these two guys hiked the trail from Pennsylvania to North Carolina and had an experience in an area called Calf Mountain, Virginia. Right, so I go through and look at some emails that I've got printed out. And what I do is, I've said it before, I get a shit ton of emails every day. I respond to them, and then I put them in a starred box. Hey, I will get back to you as soon as possible. Go through them. If they're narratable stories, I'll print them out, narrate them. If it's a phone number, I'll look at it, write down who or what they say, and I put it in a book like this. And then I put the date next to it, order it came, and then I go through it. And if they want to do an interview or if they just want to ask questions or share an experience, I go through it. I got a guy who actually is sitting on the next to-do list. Might be an interview. I hope it is. But his brother had a pretty amazing interview, or a pretty amazing experience as well. Native American fella. So I text this person and I just said, hey, this is Jeff. How are you? Didn't know if you had time to do an interview or if you wanted to talk, however you wanted to share your experience. I'm using my phone that I use just for the channel. I turned it off. There's no internet connection. It's not connected to anything except a phone card once a month. And I turn it off after every use. Would you like to maybe take a little bit of time today and talk? If so, I'm going to turn the phone off, but you have the number now. Send me an email and let me know. So I wait and I go about my day and I'm doing my own thing. And I check my emails. And Colin emails me and says, yeah, I don't want to do an interview, but I want to share my experience that my friend and I had back in 2014. Phenomenal. All right, I will give you a call in about a half an hour when I get back home. And so I give him a call and I said, how are you? We end up talking for a little bit, getting to meet each other. And that's what I like to do. I like to feel the person out beforehand. Just so, even if it's an interview, just so I know how and who they are. You can feel and know a person and get to know a person in that short period of time, usually an hour. So we end up talking and he's like, listen, I had an experience in 2009 or 14 and I was 23 years old at the time. My friend and I, Michael, and I hiked the Appalachian Trail from Pennsylvania to North Carolina. And we had someone pick us up in North Carolina. We had someone meet us in North Carolina and pick us up and drive us back home. But we had an experience in Virginia that almost our trip was almost done. The rest of the hike was super intense, super just nerve-wracking, and we were on edge for the rest of the time. But we ended up finishing it. We ended up only having the one actual occurrence. There was a lot of stuff that happened during the hike, but the physical altercation was once, and we still had half the trip to do. Like 200 miles, and so they start on a nice day in Pennsylvania, and Michael and Colin are just hiking through, and throughout the Appalachian Trail are these little shelters, and they are separated by I think the largest gap between any is like in Maine, and I think it's close to 100 miles. And then you get further into the trail, if you're going to go backwards. So, but you go further into the trails, and it's 25, 30 miles apart, 10 miles apart, 5 miles apart. Not one on top of each other, but hiking distance. And interestingly enough, these little shelters are strategically placed by a source of water. Some are a mile away, and some are right there. Like, boop, shelter, spring, and same as the shelter itself from the trail. Some are a half a mile from the trail, where there's a sign on the trail, and you have to get off of the Appalachian Trail and hike into deep woods, and there's a shelter. There's lean-tos, and there's small little cabins. I think the biggest one will fit 10 people. And the smallest, I believe, is like 4 people. And these aren't like luxury log cabins. These aren't your summer vacation homes. These are throw up buildings that, resemble an outhouse, just a little bigger. So they proceed to hike, camp, and throughout the trip, the first day or two were fine, and then his friend Michael had stopped him in the middle of the night, or middle of the hike, and said, "Colin, there's something like walking with us as we are walking," and they're side by side talking and walking. And Colin's like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "I just keep hearing, I can hear my footsteps, I hear your footsteps, and then I hear something else's footsteps." Now, Michael's focusing on footsteps and stuff because he had issues with his boots in the very, very beginning of the hike. His feet actually, he didn't properly break in his boots, so his feet the first day started to blister up and get real bad. Ended up wearing 2 sets of socks and stuff, and then eventually his boots broke in enough to where there weren't new blisters being formed, but there was still the existing blisters and still pain. So that's why he's more focused on his footsteps. And then he could hear Colin's, and then boop, he hears this other set. And Colin's like, "Well, what do you think? Is it on the trail behind us?" And he kind of turns and looks, and there's nothing there. Nothing. And he said, "No, it's off to the side of you, on your side, in the woods a distance." And he's like, "All right." And he goes, "Check this out." He goes, "Let's just stop." He goes, "Let's keep walking, and I'll hit your hand. And when you feel my hand hit you, you just instantly stop, put your foot down, and just stop." He's like, "All right, that works." And they are a little ways from one of these structures that they're going to camp in. And he does. And sure enough, they hear what sounded like 2 to 3 steps. And he looks at Colin, said, I looked at Michael like, holy shit. There's something bipedally in the woods following us. And he goes, I wonder if it's like an Appalachian serial killer. Because a long time ago there was a person who I guess stalked the trail. And they keep walking, and Colin said that, he's like, I made light of it because part of me thought that it was my imagination, even though he had heard it too. So maybe I was just, my imagination was playing off of his. Or maybe it was just randomly we heard a squirrel or something. He's the most nonsensical and logical explanation, because you could hear clearly, he said, I could hear it clearly that it was bipedal and that it was heavy, heavy like a man, heavy like something, not a squirrel, not any kind of woodland creature. They keep walking, and they get to one of these shelters, and they get in there and unpack and sit down, have a kind of a hiker portioned meal, and start to discuss what had happened today. And that's something that they've done for the last, since starting. Well, they talk about their hike, what they could do. Primarily the first 2 days were focused on Michael's feet. And he's like, I really don't want to think about someone following us. He said, but I did hear it, but my brain started to tell me that it wasn't what we heard. And Michael's like, yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. He's like, but something's out there and it's walking with us. He said, I half expect to see someone come out of the woods one time and ask us if we can help them, or if hopefully not attack us. But that's popped in my head a couple times. And Colin's like, yeah, I agree. Let's just get set for bed and go to bed and get an early jump on the day. And so they do. Around late night, midnight to 3 a.m., 4 a.m., somewhere around there, well before dawn, they're both sleeping. Obviously, you're not staying up camp. It's not like you're camping at a campsite where you're with your friend and you're drinking beer and hanging out and No, you're hiking. You're going to bed at a reasonable hour because you're freaking drained. They crash, and he's like, instantly there was this just loud kind of howl, and it echoed throughout the woods. It reverberated, and it seemed like it was bouncing off of trees, and it was just so loud. It woke both of us up, and I quickly turned on my flashlight that was more like a lantern. And I'm looking at Michael, and these little cabins are, not anything of protection wise. It's more or less to get out of the rain, or whatever, a dry place to camp, a dry place to sleep at night. It's not some place that you're secure. If worse come to worse, you probably hold your own in it if something, occurred. But they both kind of look at each other, and they hear that, and it was one howl, and it literally bounced all off the woods, and it was just, and they're looking at each other like, what the hell was that? What do you want to make of that? What do you think? And all of a sudden they hear the howl again, and it's much closer this time. And they hear just this loud running way off in the distance. But one, it's nighttime, it's crisp out, leaf litter, sticks and stuff. You can hear fairly decent. So it sounded like it was away from the cabin, but, sounded like something large was running through the woods, like a large deer or possibly, something of weight. And he listened to it, and he could hear it running further. And he said, I don't think that was the same footsteps that we heard, walking with us throughout the day. And he said, probably just a deer running from some coyotes or something like that. And Michael had made the statement of, I don't think that was a coyote howl, though. He said, this is just real big. It sounded like its chest cavity for all of that, air for that howl was just massive. And Colin's like, I had to agree with him at that time, but I didn't agree with him. He said, I really wanted to be like, I agree 100%, brother, but like, no. I said, no, don't worry about it. And they end up sitting up for a little bit talking, and then they're like, let's get back to bed. They didn't hear any more noise. And they zonk back off, and, first thing in the morning, they're up, have some breakfast, have some instant coffee. They walk a ways to the water source, which was about a half a mile in the opposite direction of the Appalachian Trail, and fill up on their water and such. They notice that they see what in the dirt and stuff, the mud, because it's a stream, what looks like large prints, unidentifiable but large. Could have been a bear, could have been a big dog, could have been a mountain lion. Definitely not coyote or some small feline. Just huge. But then he's looking, and Michael is filling up his canteen and water, water holder. And he said, Colin, does this look human to you? And he walks over, and almost as if whatever had been at the stream or spring area, it had two hands like pushed against the bank of the stream / spring, and its back feet were standing behind it, so it's leaning over it. And he's like, they do look human. They obviously, there's 5 fingers, there's an opposable thumb, you can see the actual print of. But he said, if it was a person, he said they wouldn't have tracks like this. And he said, there's only these tracks. I don't see any other strange kind of hand-looking prints. And he both kind of talking about it, and he's like, you know what? Yeah. They're both like, yeah. If there was like another set or 2 or 3 sets away from it, maybe then. But because it's only one set, maybe it is a mountain lion. And maybe it as it was drinking from this spring slash stream, it slid a little, and that's what gave it the indentation, the human hand look. Coming up with logical but illogical answers for what they're looking at. So they proceed with their hike. They're talking about everything that occurred the night before, and the strange tracks and this and that as they're hiking, and kind of dismissing everything logically, coming up with logical answers. And he's like, let's try that one, let's try it again. Let's try to stop again like we did it, the other day. They do. There's nothing. They don't hear anything. So now they're kind of like, all right, it's definitely we're in the woods. We're on the Appalachian Trail. There's wild animals all around us. Of course we're going to hear noises. Of course there's going to be something, like it's our imagination playing tricks on us, and they just kind of laugh it off. And they're like, there's three shelters ahead of them. And they're like, we could probably do 2. We could probably hit 2 today. And, when we get to the second, that's where we'll camp. Great, let's do it, And at this point, Michael is kind of wanting to end the trip. He's looking at a map and being like, we could technically, hike this way and end up in, this little town over here. It'd only take a half a day. We could do that. And come on, we kind of just figured it out that it's nothing. It's yeah, you're right. Boop, they get to the next 2 and they camp out for the night. Same process, put their stuff in, get everything set. This place is a little bigger, and there's two people already here. They introduce each other, and what's happening is they started off in Georgia, so they're going north. Michael and Colin are going south. So they start talking, and just friendly, hiker to hiker. And Michael brings up the fact of, have you guys heard anything? Have you guys had anything weird happen on the trails or anything like that? And the one female, it's a male and female group. The female says, I thought I saw what looked like a person, like a human, running through the woods earlier today, but they almost appeared naked. And I immediately, told my boyfriend, and we kind of laughed it off because why would somebody be running through the woods naked? And they're like, yeah, and then, why do you bring it up? And they proceed to tell him, well, this is what happened to us, and we stopped and we heard walking for 2 or 3 steps, and then there was something really large that ran past the shelter that we had just been at, and these really loud howls. And when they said howls, the guy goes, yeah. He goes, we heard howls last night. He said, and it sounded like whatever was making them was running. And he said it almost seemed to run right by the shelter we were at the night, last night. And Colin looks at Michael and he said, that's exactly what we heard. We heard these howls. They kind of seemed to bounce off of every tree and just super loud. And then seconds later, we hear this large quadruped running. I thought it was a deer. And then we get up in the morning, and they weren't going to say anything about the prints. They didn't want to look weird. But when she said she saw someone running naked, that kind of... And he's like, we filled up our life straw containers, our canteen things. And when we got to the spring/stream, we saw some weird tracks that looked like there were unidentifiable animal tracks. A set of two where right in front of it were what looked like handprints. So and they explained it like if I were leaning over drinking straight from the spring/stream, that's what it would look like. But obviously my feet don't look like animal paws, large animal paws. But that's kind of like what we saw. And they're just kind of like, whoa, what do you think it was? And he's like, I figure it's maybe a mountain lion, and maybe that's what we heard running, and it was running away from some coyote. And the guy goes, it didn't really sound like coyote though, right? And he's like, it was so loud, right? It was so bassy. And so they all kind of just sit there, and then Colin says, well, we are on the trails, so what do we expect? And they laugh it off, and they end up all crashing out. Sometime in the middle of the night, the female wakes everyone up with this just loud scream. And like everyone just jumps up kind of awake, and Colin turns his flashlight / lantern and turns it on, and just like looking around trying to get the gist of what happened. And she said that she had woken up and heard what sounded like footsteps on the roof, and what sounded very similar to a loud hissing noise, like just this loud screechy hiss. And they're all like, Michael goes, maybe it is a mountain lion, and maybe it's on the roof. That's what we heard, probably. Logical, right? The boyfriend, Michael and Colin don't have a firearm. The boyfriend of the girl, he does. And he pulls it out of his pack, which startle Colin and Michael. Goes out and looks with his flashlight. Colin and Michael both go with him and leave the girl in the shelter. There's nothing on the roof. But when they walk around it, they hear running going into the woods, heading in deeper. So they all look at each other, and the guy goes, don't talk about this to my girlfriend. We didn't hear anything. We didn't see anything. Let's just keep it at that. They all agree, hey, it's your girlfriend, as long as, you don't kill us tonight with your firearm, we'll definitely keep it to ourselves. They end up going in, and they feed her a story of, yeah, there's nothing out there. Maybe it was your imagination from what we were talking about earlier. Go back to bed. We're all good. And so Colin and Michael both crash out. They wake up in the morning and the guy and the girl are already gone. The guy had left a note for him, which was really nice. We left early, right at the crack of dawn. Wanted to wish you well on your hike. Stay safe. And so being that they didn't know these two, they checked all their gear. Maybe they stole something. No, they didn't. So they proceed to, once again, have some breakfast, make some coffee, and head out. So they're on their way, and Michael brings up the fact that he's like, I wonder if this is the set of woods that, because now it's like 13 miles from this camp to that camp. I wonder if this is, the set of woods where she saw that naked guy running through the woods. This would be the nearest shelter to the one we slept at last night. And Colin's like, maybe, keep an eye out. And they get to the shelter. It's just getting dark. Which really sucked because the water source is not too far away, but it's, they didn't want to be going into the woods at dark, even though they had flashlights. They had enough water to do their MRE style hiking dinners and stuff. So they were just like, we'll wait and get water in the morning. I'm beat, you're beat. That was a long haul. So they get into the shelter, unpack everything for their bedding, and make dinner quick. On top of what they have to do is they have to start a little fire to make their dinner, to heat the water that they have, and then they put the fire out, go back to bed, or go back into the shelter. That's essentially what they've done this whole time. Little fire, maybe sit around it for an hour and then head into bed. They eat. Both of them are just drained from the night prior, the incident from the night prior, and this, long ass hike that they just endured today. So they're out like lights. Get up in the morning. Nothing happens that they know of. They slept rock hard, just done. They get up in the morning to fill their water canteen, and then the spring, then they can make coffee and have breakfast. That's first and foremost. They have to go get water. So they dress and they head to the spring. And as they're heading to the spring, they're startled by this kind of loud walking. So they go to the spring to fill up the water. And they instantly are stopped dead in their tracks. They witness or see something moving off in the woods. And Colin sees it first, and he said to his friend, he's like, Mike, do you see the shadows over there? Like, what is that? And he kind of both stop and they're looking. And it's right after dawn. It's early, so light could be playing tricks on their eyes. They're in deep woods anyway. And they hear a growl. They both look at each other and they're like instant fear. It's loud, its really aggressive growl. And they both are almost frozen in fear. Like fight or flight didn't even exist at this point in their lives. They're just like dirt. And they're looking straight where this growl would have come from. And as they're looking, they see this thing run from one side of the trees to another side. And it looked like it ran quadruped, but it also looked like it was bipedal, almost like a kind of like a quick hop, like it was standing up and used its back legs to push off, but used its front to help, So there's like an arch in its back, and they both turn their head and look, and it was a decent distance, 10, 15 feet. Like, what the hell? So they're looking in this side of the tree area, and they see this large gray creature standing next to the tree. They can't see its head. They can see shoulders. They can see half of its body, and it's gray. It's this really dark gray, not black, not brown, not anything but gray. And Colin, for some reason, pushed Michael and said, "Let's go." And he said, "Don't run." And the cabin isn't that far from where they were. It's actually closer to the shelter than the majority of the ones they had been staying at. They can actually visually see it. And he said, just walk, keep an eye on our back. I'll keep an eye on our back too. And if whatever that is comes out, just start running. Run for the shelter. And so they walk, and Colin's kind of moving his body to a better position so he can see what they're looking at. In his head, he's like, this is, a Bigfoot? What is it? He can't wrap his head around what he is seeing. And he, for a split second, this thing, it was almost like he moved its head just the right way, and this thing moved its head just the right way. And they both caught eyes behind this tree, and he could make out, he first caught the eyes. They were this really dull, yellow-colored eye. Very similar in color to a cat's eye, he said. And they're not that far from each other. And then he notices a black nose that is obviously, there's a snout. And he's like, in his head, putting this all together. And he keeps looking, and they're staring at each other, and he's moving. And he looks down and looks back up, and it had moved its head back just in that period of time to look at its body. And when it moved, he saw this tail flick out, and Michael grabbed his arm to pull him, because he's now going slower than Michael was. And as he did, he fell. And when he fell, he landed and immediately caught himself and looked, and just his eyes were trained on this thing. And he hit the ground, and he springs back up. But as he sprung up, this thing had jumped from behind the tree and dropped to all fours. and was dead on staring at him. And he just kind of turned because he was like, he fell on his back, kind of like, so he turns and starts to run towards the shelter. And Michael's already on the kind of little steps of the shelter. And now Michael sees it and he goes, "Oh my God, what is that thing?" And as he said that, Colin had jumped into the shelter and just screamed, "Slam the door." Slams the door, and there's a board, kind of like those board locks where you can lock the door. And he slams that down, and they hear it just stop right at the step of the shelter. And it's walking around the shelter. Not a very big shelter, and easily not a safe place for, like this thing could have easily just ripped through the walls. Like it's not like a house. And they're both like whispering to each other, "What the hell was that?" They don't have a firearm. They've got a couple of knives. They've got a pocket knife and a fixed blade, each of them. And they've got their walking poles. They don't have bear spray. That's their some hiking poles, trekking poles, and a couple of knives. And Colin gets up, grabs his fixed blade, and he said, "I had a pretty decent sized cold steel knife, fixed blade." He goes, "It's a decent knife." He said, I probably one of my favorite knives that I own. But at that point in my head, I'm thinking, boy, I wish that guy and that girl were with us. He had a firearm. He's like, I'm always going to carry one now if we get out of here alive. And they can hear it walking, and it stops. And they're both just sitting there, and they're like, "What do we do?" We're essentially trapped. And they don't have any kind of connection to the outside world. How they can hear it growling, and it's just off to the side. So they're like, we're screwed. We're gonna have to stay here the day, the night, and maybe next day, who knows? Maybe it'll get bored and leave today. But do we really trust that? Because if it does, is it just playing us? Is it just going to play us and only go X amount of just beyond that spring where it was? So they're sitting in there for time just went by, they're hungry. They're thirsty. And they start to realize that, they can't hear it anymore. And so Michael's like, "I'm going to look outside and see if it's here. See if it's anywhere out around us. And maybe we can figure out what we're going to do from here." Colin's like, yeah, all right. I'll stand behind you, and if it's there and it tries to, get you or grab you, I'll stab it with our trekking pole. Because trekking poles have a metal tip. Some have metal tips on them that are, pretty sharp. Not sharp, but if you had to stab something with it, it's going to cause some damage. I know mine do, at least. Michael opens the door and looks. And Colin sees the light, and he's like, "Oh my God, it's, we've been in here for a long period of time. We're going to have to sleep one more night. We're actually, if we do, we're going to have to get to that spring and get some water. So they don't see it anywhere as they kind of step out onto the steps. And it's not even like a porch, it's just steps. He peers off to the side of the building where they could hear it last growling, and they don't see anything there. Michael looks to that side, and they go back in and shut the door. And they quickly talk about what they're going to do. And they come up with the idea, all right, I'll go to the spring. If you see it coming, Michael, you stand on the steps, I'll go to the spring. If you see it coming, you yell to me, and I'll try to get back to the shelter. If there's no way of me getting, if it gets me or if it's close to getting me, start running the other way. Go south, because we just traveled 13 miles. The nearest shelter is like 5. And he said there's a access trail to a small town. He said, if worse comes to worse, that's what we'll do. I'll risk myself. And Michael's like, no, what are you talking about? We're best friends. Like, I'll fucking fight with you. If you're gonna die, I'm gonna die. And so he's like, all right, then if it comes at me, let me know, and come running at it with your trekking pole and a knife. And that's the way we'll fight it. He gets to the spring and he is terrified. Colin's like, I was shitting bricks. He said, I turned around, and he said, for some reason, he said, something told me to look at the roof of the shelter. He said, as I did, I turned and I looked, and there was nothing there. He said, but I turned back to go back this way, and my eyes are still up. And he said, I saw this human form in the trees. And I looked at it, and I kind of put my head back. And he goes, I instantly knew that whatever that thing was not what chased us into the shelter. He said, it was way too skinny. Its arms were far too long. And it just didn't have a muzzle. It just this thing was scary. He said, that creature, the Dogman, that was scary. He said, but whatever that thing was just abnormally not right. There was nothing of any kind of nature or anything that resembled that thing. And he's looking at it, and Michael sees his eyes. And so Michael kind of peeks out, and as he's doing that, he screams to Colin. He goes, run back here, run back here. And Colin's still looking at that creature that's in the trees. And he's like, startled, and he's turning, and he looks back at the spring, and he's going back this way towards so the spring is in front of him, and he's going back kind of counterclockwise, and boom, Dogman, turning back, tree, creature, back, shelter. And he instantly just starts to run. The Dogman comes into the opening, and he can hear it. He can hear the growling. He can hear the running of it. and it's running quadruped, so it's super fast. He said, I get to 5 feet from the steps. He said, and I don't know, normally I am not accident prone. I rock climb, I hike, I bike, I do all kinds of things in nature. I have great balance, but I fucking fell again. 2 times in one day. And I just catch myself and I'm scurrying to pick myself up. And I hear this yelp. I hear a thud and a yelp and then another thud. And then I hear these strange growls that were not coming from that creature, the Dogman. These things sounded like they were high-pitched, they were aggressive, and they sounded violent. And there was 2 sets. He said, I jumped up onto the steps and I spun around because he said, as I'm thinking this, I'm thinking this thing's on me. He's like, I'm thinking it's so close to me that I'm not making sense of what. And he goes, I swung with my trekking pole and nothing was there. But what I saw was that creature from the trees somehow jumped on that Dogman. And then wherever the second one came from, had slammed into it again. He said the creature's trying to stand up. And I'm now on the steps and I'm standing there next to Michael just staring at this, and I'm looking at him. And these things are like literally tearing this creature apart. The Dogman struggling to get up. It was not even capable of balance of any kind of whatever. It's biting and thrashing around, but because of the way the first one hit it and then the second one hit it, it really had there was no way in hell unless it was just like, a super freaking animal. Yes, it's an apex predator, but you've got 2 creatures on you that may just be as dangerous as you. And they see blood, they see a lot of just violence. The Dogman had bit one of them, what he made out, but there was literally no chance that creature the Dogman had. And within like maybe 30 seconds, the fight seemed like it was 20 minutes, but it was maybe 45 to 35 to 45 seconds. And the creature, the Dogman, was dead. And these things are ripping at it, like just ripping pieces of flesh and sinew and guts and everything, and biting, and and we're both standing on the steps looking at these creatures, and they both turned and looked at us, and there's blood all over their faces, and their eyes, their heads were like a normal, almost like a human head, but a little longer and skinnier. The eyes were large and black, just very large black eyes. There appeared to be no kind of nose protruding off of its face. But he said maybe there was slits or holes, maybe. He said, because the next thing I saw was just blood in these teeth. He said they almost resembled what a crocodile's teeth would look like. And lots of them. and they hissed. They both, as they looked at us and we looked at them, they hissed this strange sound. And we slammed the door shut. We just and locked it. And we waited for him to, come up to the door and rip it off, because we just witnessed the amount of strength that these things had. And I opened the door a little to look out, because we hadn't heard anything for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And the Dogman's gone. The Dogman carcass is gone. And he looks back at his friend Michael and he says, we got to get out of here. We got to figure out what we're doing. We at least got to get some water. We got to, I'm thirsty. And Michael's like, just let's rough it for the night. We'll get out of here in the morning first thing. If these things want us, they'll come through that door. There's no way in hell that door is going to stop them. There's no way in hell that wall or that roof is going to stop them. From what we just saw, they'll rip right through this place if they want us. They don't sleep. They just lie in their bunks, hungry, thirsty, scared. They get up the next morning, they get out of bed, dressed. They open the door, very adamant about opening the door. They had come to the conclusion of, if these things are going to get us, they're going to get us. There's no way that they're not going to. So let's just open the door, get to that spring, fill some water up, drink some water. We'll figure out what we're doing. We'll pack up and get to the next cabin and wait to eat there. They open the door and there's nothing there. There's nothing. He walks by where the Dogman attack had happened. There's hair, blood, just visceral grossness, like flesh and muscle. And he walks by it and he gets the water for him and Michael. Comes back. Michael's on the steps looking, because he's the lookout. And he said, like, once again, same way. If they come at him, he'll run and they'll just start stabbing and fighting for their life. But, at this point, what they just saw, what they witnessed that night, that day before, they know they're not a match for those. So they fill up their water to get some drinks in them. They leave the door open as they're packing, because they're like, screw it. We're going to be outside. We can't be trapped in here. We'll just pack up and go. They pack up, walk out, and they're looking around. And Colin goes, should we cover the mess? So in case someone, comes here, they don't see it and blame us, because they had actually signed their name in the sign-in book, and so they grab some pine branches and kind of sweep it around and as best as they can. But I mean, a creature of large stature just got massacred right there. They get to the next cabin, next shelter, and it's midday. They're starving. They don't hear anything throughout the whole day. They start a little fire. They find the water. And the water, this spring, is further away. It's about a quarter of a mile away. And so when they go into this structure, there's usually there is a jug, like an empty jug, a bucket, a couple buckets and stuff. And, just some essentials people carried in and left, or the trail upkeep leaves in for people to use to put out water, to put out your fire, to do this, to do that. They bring the 5-gallon bucket with them to the spring and fill up all their stuff, carry it back, and start a fire. So now they have water. At least if we're going to be trapped here, we at least have water. And we'll figure out eating the shit cold if we have to. They heat up some water, start a little fire, heat up some water. It's like 4 or 5 o'clock. And they eat. And they're like, all right, well, should we press on and get to the next one? They look at the map. It's like 8 miles, 9 miles away. No, they won't make it in time. All right, we'll press on. There's 2 cabins within 15 miles. So next one's like 8 or 9, and then the other one's 6, 7 miles away. So we'll do that. We'll hit the second one the next day. So they eat, go to bed. They're talking about everything. They don't hear anything. They don't hear anything. The woods are dead silent. They realize that as they're laying in these little plywood cots. And Michael goes, there's a predator outside tonight. Just like that. He said, Colin's like, I'll never forget that freaking statement, because we're laying there and he goes, there's a predator outside tonight. And I wanted to look at him and go, yeah, no shit, there's 2 of them. But the reason why he said that was because he realized before I did that the woods were totally silent. They do get a couple hours of sleep. Very, not restful either. They're walking out. They've got 2 to 3 days ahead of them if they push the way they're going to push. It's about a 2.5 day. So technically 3 days. The rest of the trip, all they hear is sometimes the woods are dead silent, sometimes they're not. They hear what sounds like movement in the trees off to the side of them and running off to the side of them. They get to their last location. The nights were fine, just like the previous night. No kind of anything, except the nights were dead silent. So it's like these things were making themselves known. They get to the last shelter before they're going to hit this access road to get into town where their ride will be in a day. They're going to camp they're going to sleep in a hotel. And as they are walking onto the access road, they start to walk and they hear this just ungodly shriek. And they turn around because now they're like, great, we're on an access road. It's dirt road, but it's still Appalachian Trail's right there. We're not going to make it off it. And they turn to look and they see these 2 crawlers, essentially. And he said, when they went up the trees, he said they looked like chimpanzees. He said they were so agile that they didn't appear human in any way except bipedally in 2 arms. But how they maneuvered in the trees was something of just honest. It was a spectacle to see because it looked identical to how a chimpanzee or an apex primate would. Just, and then they would jump to another tree. And they just proceeded to walk out of there, keeping an eye over their shoulder the whole time. They get to midway to where the access road will meet the main road before their hotel area would be. They got to walk about a mile to the hotel from the main road, and they see what looked like a naked guy running through the woods off to the side of them. And they realize that's what the girl saw. These creatures are what she saw. But where's the other one? And now they're like, and it was running towards where they had just come from. And Michael goes, I don't think that's the same one. He goes, I think there's 3 of them. Colin looks at him and he goes, just walk as fast as we can out of here. He goes, because if there's 3 of them, we might be on the next hunt list for these things. They get to Main Road Hotel, notify the person to pick them up. They are already on their way. They're a couple of hours away. And at that point, the only person Colin has ever shared this with is his best friend Michael, but Michael's significant other and Colin's now wife. They had no idea what they were looking at with these crawlers. Why did it attack the Dogman? Why did it protect them? I don't know if it was protecting them. Maybe it was keeping their area secure away from these creatures. Who knows? At this point, that's speculation of why. Why would they attack a Dogman? Obviously not to protect 2 humans. Because they kind of did mess with by those hissing noises and other things that they would do to kind of intimidate them. But once again, that intimidation, and I had brought this up, I said, once again, the intimidation factor is very primate-like too. So that was Colin and Michael's experience on the Appalachian Trail back in 2014. All right, so interestingly enough here, I have talked a lot about where these creatures have come from, where I believe they have come from. And my own belief is I do not believe they are I believe they are a genetic creation by the alien/demonic creatures of the Luciferian agenda. I believe that all aliens, these grays, these reptilians, I believe that the majority of them are demonic. I don't know about the whole angel aspect. I don't know if Nordics are. Maybe they are. I really have to kind of think more on that. It's a topic that I need to look into more. But I believe what happened was these alien/demonic grays with the reptilians took genetic species, genetic codes from whatever creatures they saw on this planet and spliced them to create these killing machines as possibly some sort of weapon for them. A organic weapon. And to me, that makes a lot of sense, especially because of their different qualities and different things that they possess, human-like arms, human-like legs, strange looking features like a gray, teeth similar to a reptilian. But now this is what kind of freaked me out a little bit, was how he said how these creatures acted, how they maneuvered like some sort of primate, like a chimpanzee, and how they displayed a intelligence maneuverability such that only primates would have. Just real interesting. And it only makes me think more about what and how these creatures used genetics and other things to create organic weapons. And there you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed today's Halloween upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that helps the channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories, judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please, everyone, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, the family, and our friends. These creatures are real. These events, well, they've happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.